Hello, fiends, friends, and familiars. This is Matt Orozco here from Macabre Daily, and I'm once again joined by an amazing horror filmmaker, this time Hayden Hewitt, who is both the writer and director of the upcoming film, or it's already been released in some parts, released at Fright Fest, but coming out on digital on the 17th of February, Cara. So, Hayden, thank you so much for spending some time with me today.
Oh no, thank you for spending yours with me. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And I just watched the film last night, really enjoyed it. Completely unhinged ending, kind of the stuff I love to see as a horror fan. And so going into my first question here, I'm really curious to understand your inspirations for the film.
There's no single sort of inspiration. It first came out many years ago when DSLRs came out. I picked one of those up and I was like, we need to make a movie. And of course, it turns out I needed to make a movie. Nobody else needed to make a movie, but we were throwing around a few ideas. And one I came up was with an earlier iteration of Cara. But it's all driven by people I've met, people I know, personal experience, the world around us. It's not like you have to reach out far to pick a horror
Right.
from the world around us. And it just all sort of coalesced over time into a narrative. Then there was a frantic bit of script writing a few months before we shot. And that was our. You get asked a lot, where did the idea come from? It'd be great to have, well, I met this person who'd done it, or, some kind of divine inspiration. But like most ideas, you start off with a small kernel, you wander around in a daze for a couple of months trying to put it all together, and then something coalesces and comes together, and you end up with, in my case, something incredibly dark and terrible. But,
Well, terrible in the sense of the content, not so much in the delivery. I feel
I
like
appreciate that. Thank you. Yes.
and I agree with you that I feel like, as someone does quite a bit of interviews, we often lead with the inspiration question, but you're right, it's never kind of a singular answer in most cases. It's usually an amalgamation of, well, had this idea for a decade and I finally just decided now's the time to do it, or things change. I mean, even the Late Night with the Devil film was like been worked on for 10 years before they actually decided to make it. So I think there was a
Yeah, and
process
they
here.
can often take a huge right or left turn. Just before with mine, we'd agreed we were going to make Cara. So we're making some short films, and I was working on a short film called Uncle Jack, which we've not released because we're going to make the feature next. And I remember going into the living room set that we had in like the studio space, and I went in there. I was on my own during a break, just relaxing because directing is quite intense, and any quiet time you can get. And I remembered it was the first time I'd really felt like I'm a film director. I feel like a film director. This is great. And doing such a grown up story, and then something clicked. Literally, while I stood there, that piece of what was troubling me with the Cara script fell into place. And from there, it was just go.
Uh, I mean, they say that unstructured free thought is the breeding ground of ideas. So oftentimes
It's
when
an
people let
essential
go of the
part.
trying.
Yeah, essential part of writing, I find. I mean, everyone's different, and there are many books on. I've not read any books on screenwriting. I only know about screen formatting because when I was a kid, I used to read George Romero scripts. The original script for Day of the Dead as he wanted to, and that's where I learned how you format scripts. So if I've done anything wrong, it's George Romero's fault. But I find a big part of it is you'll have a germ of an idea, and then I have to roll it around in my head maybe for a couple of months just
Right.
to see how it fits and starts. And then I'll start with some notes, and then I'll start writing the script. But the first part of it is just letting things bounce around inside of your head, waiting for pieces to come together, or in some cases, not. But it's the most important part of it because that's where all the magic happens. The actual
Yeah.
writing down is, just journaling the film you're watching inside your head.
Right. And that's, I think, so many filmmakers and creatives carry around like idea books or finding a way to capture thoughts because they do happen in such a spontaneous way that
Mm.
you don't want to lose a kernel that could potentially help you later on. I want to chat a little bit about the emphasis on mental health in the film because it's a
Yeah.
pretty important topic not just for the purposes of the narrative, but also in our society today. Obviously, I'm based in the US where we have a privatized healthcare system, but I know my colleagues in the UK, you have the NHS, but it's very difficult for people with mental health issues to even get seen, let alone getting
Yeah.
prescriptions. And, you know, what I found so interesting about Kara is that you don't treat her with the same sympathies that we often see for mental health, and in the sense that we understand her plight, but we also see her as a very complex character. And I'm curious to know, like, how you arrived at the decision to not make her kind of either good or bad, but rather just present her as is.
That was a very early decision because I knew the film for me wouldn't work if I portrayed her as a swivel-eyed psychopath or, a cunning
Right.
black widow or just a cowering victim. Because human beings are very rarely that simplistic. I mean, certain types of film, absolutely, you'd write that because it'd work for the film. But for Cara, she had to be a person of many facets, like every real person is. And one of the big things I know Elle O'Hara, who played Cara, worked really hard on was to make her not so much that you'd sympathise, but you'd quite like her, even though she
Yeah.
was clearly capable of being quite unpleasant.
Yeah.
She was a victim of her circumstances. So it's very important not to make her a predictable or easy character. I mean, for Elle, I gave her Kara's entire life story as I
Wow.
knew it, and she didn't share that with anyone else. Each of the characters had to keep their stuff separate, and we had a Google document for about 3, 4 weeks before the film where she put a question in, I'd put something in, she put something in, and it ended up just being this really long ass Google document. But it was fascinating because I love working with actors. I love watching the process. And then you've got the entirely opposite end of the process, which would be James Dreyfus, who played Greg, the doctor in it. You didn't have to tell him anything. He came in knowing, because obviously it's a smaller character, but he came in knowing exactly what it was. He's not interested in his life, so he's got it. Bang. So everyone's very different, but Cara required a concealed man. I think what really helped is that Elle saw her as quite innocent
Yeah. And she
overall.
definitely
And
portrayed that way, I
yeah, she
think.
pulled that right out of the character and certainly, took it and ran and created, I think, a brilliant character, but I am biased. But I think Elle, really put her heart and soul into that.
No, you can see, I think it's in the eyes, right? When you're playing a complex character, a lot of times we look into people's faces, and her representation of Kara always has this sense of sadness that like
Yeah,
she's just barely hanging on to the little bit of sanity she's got, and then she loses it, and it's frightening. So I think that transition is really well done, and it leads me to another question. You make an effort to visually show through color grading, when Kara's having some sort of delusion.
yeah.
Why was it important for you to make that clear?
I went back and forth on it a lot during because I edited and did the color grade on Cara because we're a low budget feature. You have to, everything
Right.
from director to toilet cleaner. You do everything in between. But I got the actors to play it very straight, which was very difficult for them because the words are
Right.
really very arch. Yeah, I mean, the temptation to start twirling the mustache and must have been very strong. The only one I let walk and talk it a little was possibly Lawrence Harvey, because it just fit so beautifully. So when I was doing the edit, I had two versions. I still have two versions. One where it just seamlessly goes into it and comes out of it. And I just thought I'm going to try and show a change here because I was worried about telegraphing a little too much, or
Mhm.
I didn't want the audience to think I was saying you're too stupid to understand what's happening here. Let me help you. But I did want to create just a different feel to those scenes and to make them a little more unreal. And the rest was trial and error.
Right.
I like the whole look of the film. Really, that changed over the course of nearly a year
I
until
think
one day I watched a couple of Technicolor films and thought, "Oh, screw this realism stuff. I'm going my own way." And that's why it's that muted color palette, but very saturated in the reds and everything else. But those sections, it was important because I knew towards the end of the film for the Queen section, the red section. So I don't want to give spoilers. I'm terrible for
Right.
it. But I knew that was going to be all blacks and reds and, very oversaturated and, very hard contrast. So I kind of wanted something that would lead towards that as well.
It makes a lot of sense, I think, as you explain it, how we get these flashes of difference in visual look, and then eventually it culminates into something that is, merges the two, right? We see the color
Yeah.
palette start to converge a little bit at the end, and the
And then it
distinction between,
slots back into reality.
right.
Um,
And it works. So you definitely move between them because there are points when you are put in Kara's delusion, right? I think that's what it
yes.
helps to do is that it doesn't, you're not an observer at that point. You are an active participant in her delusion because you're seeing it the way she sees it.
Well, there is the other part because it's a very observational film. I try not to lead anyone by the hand on any of the issues in it, being mental health, misogyny, porn, anything like that. So to have the occasional part where you do step a little outside of that seemed to me to be very useful. Because the last thing I wanted was a dry observational film because they can be dreadfully tedious. So I thought these would be good opportunities just to give a little break in a way and to get people in there so they could be in there with her while she has the conversation in her head.
I think we don't get that perspective all the time because we're seeing it from how the outsider sees it rather than how the individual sees it,
Yeah.
unless we're kind of thrust into it full on and just kind of just, confused as to what we're seeing. But you also, you touched on this just now, these the idea of like toxic masculinity and to some extent also the entitlement that I think comes from the kind of voyeuristic world we live in around sex work, where people feel almost emboldened to treat people they don't know a certain way because either they're giving them money or because there's some exchange of service or good. And I'm wondering what informed your perspective here around this kind of, this discussion around sex work, but also, masculinity and misogyny.
As well as seeing the ongoing thing we have nowadays, like with OnlyFans and sex work is work. And it's very difficult because there is a duality there of, you're an adult, you should be able to do whatever you like.
Right.
Not my business. But there's the other part of me as a middle-aged guy and a father and worries about people that thinks you're damaging your life. This takes more than it'll ever give.
Right.
But it's not my job to tell people that. It's your life. You're over 18. Go live it. Drive it till the wheels fall off. But there was one thing in particular around the dawn of cam streaming. Very early days of it, I was involved with a different website, not a porn site. I've never worked in that industry. But you meet people from the tech industry and everything else. So I said, click
Yeah.
that link. They sent me a link on ICQ, I imagine, which shows how old.
Ah,
Uh,
you're throwing me back here, Hayden. I
oh,
was on
yeah, but
ICQ.
I was a grown ass man at this point. But I clicked the link and he went to a very early campsite because he was one of the developers. He just put me straight in instead of paying. And there was a small live stream of a woman sat on a bed, naked apart from an ankle tag. So obviously life hadn't been going great. She looked very hard worn. I don't think she was old. She just looked life.
Yeah.
And she was sat on this bed looking distinctly unhappy. And next to her, there was the text chat window because there was no voice chat, it was just text chat. And it was just full of really angry men. They just seemed angry and bitter. And I remember even at that time, I'd have been, late 20s, 30, I don't remember now. But I just remember thinking, what is anyone getting out of this? Apart
Right.
from maybe the chance to humiliate somebody. But even that's not working because they already know what state their life's in. And that always stuck with me. It always
Yeah.
stuck with me. I could never quite shake that because it seemed like one of the most miserable experiences. It's always like when I used to work for a big company and we go and do trade shows and I was a guitar demonstrator, but all the sales guys would get together and he'd be like, do you want to come out to the lap dancing club? And I'd be like, nah, I'm going to stay in my hotel room and play guitar. It's not because I'm a prude. It's just I find these things depressing. I
Right.
don't find it titillating to sit on my hands while a stranger gets undressed. And I'm so terribly British. It's like, oh, hello. Yeah. Um, And I've just, never been, I'm comfortable with that world existing. I've just never been comfortable inside it. But that one thing stuck me, and that stuck me when I was writing Cara. That directly informed the webcam scene, which I made less grim than that because it was mostly just about reactions. But yeah, that was a one to one, that was a bridge of 20 odd years from the event to it being in Cara.
I mean, it stands out so profoundly to me, largely because we don't often get we usually get a very binary perspective of sex work. It's either trying to defend it in a way that doesn't acknowledge the toll it can take on, the people that are doing it. At the same time, we also have this demonization element of like it's just outright wrong. We shouldn't be doing it. And I think the way you present it so complexly works in service of our understanding that people are um, the anonymity of the internet has allowed us to change our society, our social contract with each other.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah. It's like Mike Tyson said, wouldn't he? Everyone's got an idea till they're punched in the mouth.
right?
Um, the disassociation from people is a great worry, especially for young people now, because they've grown up in a world without consequence. I'm not talking that everyone should be smacked in the mouth, but if you say something hurtful and you see the pain you cause, there's a lesson there.
Right.
If you can just, and don't get me wrong, I've been on the internet a long time and trolling was always the most fun you could possibly have. So I've been as guilty as everyone else. But I don't think I've ever set out to really hurt people, but I see it all the time and there's no consequence. So, that very much formed the character that Jacob Roberts played in the film of the abusive husband. There's no consequence until there is,
Right. And
until
and
there is.
and he gets his and I'm happy to see the turn that takes for him because I think
Well, we don't know what happens to him. A woman pulled me up, actually an American lady pulled me up outside a film festival and said, can I just ask? And this is a bit of a spoil, but the ending for him was not quite as satisfactory as she'd hoped.
sure.
And I had to say, well, isn't it like that in real life as well? It often is. They walk among us, they never get caught, they get away with everything. I'm not saying that's what happens to him, but unfortunately, I couldn't make her feel any better because I stopped writing him at that point. I'm not sure what happened to him after the film, but I just invite people to decide for themselves and they can make their own minds up about that.
No, I think it was a smart choice to leave it somewhat ambiguous. I mean, I drew my own conclusion, I think, because of some of the things that happened to him. But at the same time, you're right. A lot of his deeds don't go punished directly. It's more
Yeah.
inferred. And you mentioned that there's a few things that maybe didn't make it into the final elements. Is there anything that you took out that um, you're still thinking, oh, maybe I should have left it in?
No, not maybe I should have left it in. There's some I took out I think that might have been fun to leave in. Excuse me. It's actually a slightly toned down version that we got, which for some people is an alarming thought. Um, but there was a couple of things that I think would have played really well at festivals, but it would have been for the wrong reason. You know,
Hmm.
um, I mean, I love films like the Terrifier films. I think Damien Leone is smashing it out of the park. I get it. I absolutely get it. And I'm put one of them on, I'm in there. It's like watching an 80s slasher, but brought up to date. It's all just gonzo craziness, but I couldn't put any of that into Cara because it would have destroyed the film. So there were a couple of effects that had to go. And there was a part at the end which could feasibly have made it a little more grim. Um, and we were going right up to it, right up to it. But after watching Johnny and Elle and how their characters worked in real life, I sort of called a bit of a change. I'll tell you after the recording. Um, but I just said, don't do that. Just tell her you love her.
Yeah.
And then that changed sort of the whole dynamic of it. And that was simply based. I didn't want to do what I was going to do to my characters. I'd fallen in love with them too much. As awful as John Fisk is, and I'd fallen in love with watching these two guys work together too much to do what I was going to do. So Yeah, it changed, but I don't regret taking it. I think it improved it as a film, whether it was my idea or somebody else's suggestion. I think Cara is probably exactly what it's meant to be.
I think I firmly believe in, choice, and I believe in the vision that a filmmaker puts forward. So I often don't question the choice as much as I do. I'm always curious to understand the why. And, my last question for you is a bit of a fun one around, if you were asked to program a double feature and one of those films is Cara, what other film would you want to put alongside it?
Cool. Um, this is why I could never be a festival programmer. If you're going to put something after it, Evil Dead 2.
A bit
Just
of
because,
levity.
yeah, I can't pick like Martyrs or a Serbian film. Who wants to sit through that again? Um, so yeah, you've got to pick something that will just take everybody back to a happy place. And I find that a couple of beers in Evil Dead 2 will put me very nicely in a very happy place.
Oh my goodness. I think I spent a good chunk of my teenage years just drinking beer and watching Evil Dead 2. So I'm
It's essential.
yeah.
It's an essential component to a healthy life.
Yeah, it's a part of a balanced diet, I'd like to say as well. So, Hayden, I really appreciate this time today. You've been an absolute pleasure to speak to, and I want to remind everyone
Thank you.
watching this that Cara will be out on digital from Reel to Reel Films on February 17th. And hopefully, we get a physical release at some point. I'm a big physical media collector,
Definitely.
so
There will be a physical release later in the year. We're probably gonna do it ourselves. Because we're kind of keen on that idea because we can put more on and do what we
yeah.
want. So there will definitely be a physical release, but that will be later in the year because I'm a little bit stuck for time at the moment because we're going into the next film. So
Yeah.
yeah, but it will happen and I will let you know.
Please do, because I would love to add it to my collection. And again, Hayden, I really appreciate your time today.
No worry, dude. Thank you for taking your time to speak to me. I appreciate it. Take
My
care.
pleasure.